It was supposed to be an ordinary evening in a quiet neighborhood. A black homeowner pressed the button to open his garage door, thinking nothing of it, until piercing screams shattered the calm. A neighbor, notorious for her HOA power trips, was on the phone with 911, claiming he had just stolen her brand new car. Within minutes, sirens echoed through the streets, flashing lights painted the block, and confused neighbors gathered, whispering about what was really going on. What no one knew was that this night would expose something much bigger than a car. It would tear the mask off prejudice, power, and entitlement in one of the most shocking neighborhood showdowns ever caught on camera. Thomas Green had lived in Oakwood Heights for over 7 years. To him, his home wasn't just a house. It was his sanctuary, a place where he had poured his sweat and hard-earned money into creating stability for his family. As one of the very few black homeowners in a neighborhood ruled by a rigid HOA, Thomas kept to himself. He mowed his lawn every Saturday, greeted his neighbors politely, and never once missed a dues payment. But no matter how careful he was, there was always one person watching him with suspicious eyes: Patricia Vaughn, a longtime resident who also happened to be one of the most influential HOA board members. Patricia had built a reputation in the community as the self-proclaimed protector of the neighborhood. To some, she was simply strict. To others, she was a nightmare. She issued fines for the smallest things: a garbage can left out for an extra hour, a holiday decoration still hanging after the season had ended, even grass that was a shade too long. But when it came to Thomas, her scrutiny went beyond rules. It was personal. Neighbors whispered that Patricia was relentless, and Thomas had experienced it firsthand. Every move he made seemed to attract her complaints. And though he tried to brush it off, it wore on him. Still, nothing could have prepared him for the night when Patricia's obsession would spiral out of control. That evening began like any other. Thomas returned home after a long day of work, his mind set on relaxing. But the moment his garage door began to rise, his world shifted. A silver SUV, one he'd never seen before, sat parked squarely in his garage. Confused, he froze. Within seconds, Patricia was screaming across the street, and what happened next would turn a quiet cul-de-sac into the stage for a neighborhood battle no one would ever forget. As Thomas stood frozen in his driveway, staring at the unfamiliar SUV in his garage, confusion gave way to disbelief. He rubbed his eyes as if he had imagined it, but no. There it was. His garage, his property, and someone else's car parked right inside. Before he could even process what was happening, a shrill voice pierced the air. Patricia Vaughn stormed out of her house across the street, clutching her phone, her voice loud enough for the entire block to hear. "He's stealing my car. He's in my garage. Send the police right now." Her words cut through the evening air like knives, and within seconds, curtains in nearby homes fluttered as neighbors peeked out to see the commotion. Thomas felt his stomach tighten. He hadn't even stepped foot into the garage yet. But already, Patricia had crafted a story. To her, he wasn't a homeowner. He wasn't a neighbor. He was a criminal, and she was determined to convince the world of it. Neighbors began spilling out onto their lawns. Some stood silently, arms crossed, while others whispered among themselves. The scene was escalating quickly, and Thomas knew exactly how dangerous it could become. A black man accused of stealing, with the police on their way, was not a situation to take lightly. He raised his hands slightly, not in surrender but in frustration, trying to calm the scene. But Patricia wasn't calming down. She was pacing, shouting into her phone, making sure every word carried across the cul-de-sac. "You can't just park in my garage and call it yours," Thomas finally managed, his voice firm but measured. He knew shouting back could only worsen things, but the absurdity of the accusation was boiling inside him. The whispers among the neighbors grew louder. A few sided with Patricia immediately, not because they saw the truth, but because they had long accepted her authority. To them, her word was law. Others, however, looked uneasy. They had seen Patricia's behavior before. They had watched her patrol the neighborhood like she owned it, issuing threats and fines, but even they weren't sure what to believe now. After all, why would a brand new SUV be sitting in Thomas's garage? Minutes felt like hours as the distant sound of sirens grew closer. Thomas's heart pounded. He thought about his job, his family, his reputation, how quickly everything he had worked for could be undone by one false accusation. He also thought about the irony of it all. He was standing outside his own home, and yet, in this moment, he felt like an outsider, a trespasser, in a space he had earned. Then came the moment that would change everything. Patricia, still screaming into her phone, shouted, "He stole the car I just bought. He broke into my garage." Her voice cracked with a mix of fury and desperation. And that was when Thomas realized she wasn't just accusing him of trespassing. She was accusing him of grand theft, right in front of the entire neighborhood. By the time the flashing red and blue lights painted the cul-de-sac, the crowd of neighbors had doubled. Some had phones out recording the chaos. Others were whispering frantically. Thomas stood still, his chest tight, waiting for the officers to step out. He knew this could either end in disaster or in a revelation that would finally expose Patricia for who she really was. The question was, who would the police believe when they arrived? The HOA board member screaming accusations, or the black man standing silently, praying for justice on his own property? The squad car rolled to a stop, its headlights flooding the driveway. 2 officers stepped out, hands resting on their belts, eyes scanning the scene. Patricia immediately ran toward them, her voice shrill with false urgency. "That's him. That's the man. He stole my car and hid it in his garage," she cried, pointing at Thomas as though she had just uncovered a dangerous criminal. Her words were sharp, rehearsed, and dripping with conviction. Thomas stood still, his palms slightly raised, his voice calm but steady. "Officers, this is my house. That garage is mine. I didn't steal anything." The neighbors leaned closer, phones held high to capture every second. The block was silent except for the sound of Patricia's frantic accusations. She waved her arms, her tone rising with each word, painting Thomas as a thief bold enough to break into her property. One of the officers motioned for Thomas to step aside while the other approached the garage. The tension was unbearable. Every eye was fixed on the rising door as Thomas pressed the opener again. The SUV gleamed under the garage light, sitting squarely on his concrete floor. Patricia gasped dramatically, clutching her chest as if the sight itself confirmed her story. But then came the question that shifted the energy of the night. "Ma'am," the officer said, his voice firm, "do you have proof this vehicle belongs to you?" Patricia fumbled. Her phone shook in her hand as she tried to pull up paperwork she didn't have. She stuttered, claimed she had just bought it, and muttered about misplaced documents. Meanwhile, Thomas quietly produced his own proof: registration papers, keys in his hand, and security footage on his phone showing the SUV being delivered to his driveway just days earlier. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Some neighbors gasped, others shook their heads. Patricia's face flushed red as the narrative she had tried to spin unraveled right there in the open. The officers exchanged looks. In that moment, it was clear who was lying. Patricia's authority, her HOA power, and her loud accusations crumbled under the weight of undeniable evidence. But the damage had already been done. The humiliation, the public spectacle, the fear Thomas had endured, all because of one woman's entitlement and prejudice. And as Patricia realized she was cornered, she didn't apologize. Instead, she pointed one last time, her voice breaking. "This isn't over." But deep down, everyone watching knew it already was. As the sirens faded and the crowd dispersed, one thing was clear: Patricia's power had collapsed. Her frantic lies, once backed by HOA authority, now stood exposed in front of everyone. Neighbors who had once feared her rule now whispered in disbelief. For years she had used fines, threats, and intimidation to control the block. But in one night, her entire facade crumbled. Thomas, though shaken, stood taller than ever. The SUV in his garage wasn't just a car. It was proof of ownership, proof of dignity, proof that the truth cannot be erased no matter how loudly it's attacked. Neighbors who once looked away now approached him with quiet respect. Some apologized, others simply nodded, acknowledging what they should have seen long ago. Patricia never regained her influence. Every meeting she tried to lead ended in mistrust and ridicule. The woman who claimed to protect the neighborhood was unmasked as nothing more than a bully. But for Thomas, the lesson cut deeper. It wasn't just about clearing his name. It was about survival, about the fragility of trust when prejudice is louder than truth. That night, the question burned into everyone's mind. Why does it take overwhelming proof for a black man to be believed, while a single false accusation can nearly destroy him? The garage door that once opened to chaos, now opened to quiet, strength. And as Thomas looked at his home, his space, his hard-earned sanctuary, he knew this fight wasn't just for him. It was a reminder to everyone watching